Good evening, sir, or madam. Either way, welcome back to the channel where we dive deep into the gritty realities of the past that your textbooks conveniently left out. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because today we're exploring one of ancient Rome's most taboo yet integral professions, the life of those who worked in the city's brothels. Before we begin, I need to set some expectations. This video isn't going to romanticize or sensationalize. We're going to examine the brutal economic, social and physical realities that these individuals, mostly women, but also men and children, faced daily. It's a story about survival, exploitation, and the crushing weight of ancient Roman class structures. So let's pull back the curtain on what a day actually looked like for someone working in this profession during the height of the Roman Empire. Don't forget to like this video and drop a comment below telling me what historical topic you'd like me to cover next. And if you want to support the channel, consider becoming a member. Your support helps me continue creating this content. Now, let's step into ancient Rome. Chapter 1. The morning reality, waking up in a lupanarium. Your eyes open to near total darkness. It's just before dawn in Rome, somewhere around 140 CE, during the reign of Antoninus Pius. You're lying on a thin, straw-stuffed mattress that's seen better decades. The stone walls around you are covered in crude graffiti, names of clients, boasts about performance, insults about other workers, and occasional drawings that would make a modern person blush. But you've stopped noticing them months ago. The cell you occupy is barely larger than a closet, maybe 7 feet by 7 feet if you're lucky. There's no window. The only light comes from the flickering oil lamp in the corridor outside your doorway, which isn't really a door at all, just a curtain that offers the barest illusion of privacy. The air is thick with the smell of bodies, cheap perfume, olive oil, and the less pleasant odours of a building that houses dozens of people with limited access to proper sanitation. You're cold. Rome in winter gets down to the 40s Fahrenheit, and your tiny cell has no heating whatsoever. Your only covering is a threadbare blanket that's probably older than you are. The wool, if you can even call it that anymore, has been worn thin by countless bodies and never properly cleaned. It smells of mildew and sweat, but it's the only thing standing between you and the stone cold that seeps up from the floor and radiates from the walls. You didn't choose to be here. Very few people in your profession did. Maybe you were born into it, the child of another worker with no other prospects. In Roman law, if your mother was enslaved, you were born. Enslaved, regardless of who your father was. The principle of partus sequitur ventrum meant that your fate was sealed from the moment of conception. Maybe you were enslaved through the conquest of your homeland, marched hundreds of miles in chains to be sold in Rome's massive slave markets. Maybe your family was so desperately poor that they sold you, making the impossible calculation that your suffering was preferable to the entire family starving to death. Maybe you sold yourself to avoid destitution, not understanding what you were really agreeing to. Here's the harsh truth. Roman society didn't see you as fully human. The legal term for your profession was prostituta, derived from prostituere, meaning to put forth for sale. But you occupied one of the lowest rungs on the social ladder, considered infamis, without honour, without legal protections that citizens enjoyed, without the ability to testify in court except under torture, or marry a citizen. You were property, commodity, a body for rent. The Romans had elaborate systems of status and classification, and you existed in the category of people who were legally persons but socially non-persons, acknowledged to exist but denied the dignity granted to respectable citizens. As you force yourself to sit up, your body protests immediately. Yesterday was busy, which means you're dealing with the cumulative effect of physical strain that has no time to heal. Your muscles ache in ways that have become so familiar They're almost background noise. The medical care available to you is virtually non-existent unless you're valuable enough for your owner to invest in keeping you healthy. And even then, Roman medicine is a gamble of legitimate knowledge mixed with superstition and practices that might do more harm than good. Most workers in this profession in ancient Rome didn't live past their 30s. Disease, violence, complications from forced terminations of pregnancies, infections, and the simple wear and tear of the work claimed most workers young. The life expectancy for someone in your position was significantly lower than even the already low average life expectancy of the Roman poor. You've already seen workers disappear. Some died, some were sold to other establishments or different forms of slavery. Some simply vanished in the night, and no one asked questions about what happened to them. You hear stirring in the other cells. The lupanarium, the Latin term for brothel, derived from lupa, meaning she-wolf, a slang term that dates back centuries in Roman culture. Houses maybe 20 other workers in this particular establishment. The size varies. Some brothels are smaller operations with only a handful of workers, while larger establishments in prime locations might have 30 or more. Each worker represents a revenue stream, and your owner has calculated the exact number that maximizes profit, while minimizing the overhead of feeding and housing you all. Some of your fellow workers are as young as 12, possibly even younger. Roman law technically prohibited the exploitation of children under puberty, but that law was enforced about as well as you'd expect, in a society where enslaved children had no rights whatsoever, and where the definition of puberty could be conveniently interpreted. The aediles, the officials supposedly responsible for regulating brothels, could be bribed to overlook violations, and besides, they didn't particularly care about the welfare of enslaved children. The others range up to women in their late 20s, which in this profession makes them practically ancient. You've heard stories of a few women who somehow survived into their 30s while still working, but you've never actually met one. They're myths, cautionary tales, or exceptional cases that prove the rule rather than contradict it. The overseer is already moving through the corridor, banging on the walls to wake everyone. His name is Quintus, a freedman, who works for your owner managing the day-to-day operations. He's not cruel by the standards of people in his position. He doesn't beat workers without reason, and he occasionally shows small mercies, like allowing someone who's visibly ill to rest for a few hours. But he's also not your friend or protector. His job is to maximize productivity, which means making sure you're all awake, presentable, and ready to work as soon as the brothel opens. You don't have the luxury of sleeping in or deciding you're not feeling well today. This isn't a job you can call out of sick. You're property, and property doesn't get sick days. You stand and immediately feel the cold stone floor beneath your bare feet. The floor hasn't been properly cleaned in weeks, maybe months. There's a thin layer of grit and debris that you've learned to ignore. Your clothing is minimal, a simple tunic made from the cheapest fabric available. Unlike Roman citizens who might wear fine wool or linen, your garment is rough, scratchy, and designed for easy removal rather than comfort or modesty. The fabric is so thin it's nearly transparent in good light, which is intentional. It advertises what's available without requiring potential clients to use much imagination. You don't have shoes for inside the brothel. Those are a luxury reserved for when you're allowed outside, which isn't often. Your owner doesn't trust the workers to go out freely. Too much risk that someone might try to run, though where you'd run to is unclear. The streets of Rome are patrolled by vigiles, the urban cohorts, and various other authorities who would happily return a runaway enslaved person to their owner for a small reward. And even if you somehow escape the city, then what? You have no money, no contacts, no papers if you're enslaved, and the brand or tattoo on your body that marks you as belonging to this profession. Some owners mark their workers, literally branding them like cattle to discourage escape and make recovery easier. There's no privacy for washing. A communal room with a large basin serves all the workers. It's essentially a stone trough, maybe 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, filled with cold water that gets changed once a day if you're lucky, less often if water is scarce or your owner is being particularly cheap. The water is cold and has already been used by several others by the time you get to it, taking on a greyish tinge from the accumulated dirt and oils of unwashed bodies. You do your best to clean yourself with the harsh soap available, if there's soap at all. Roman soap was made from animal fats and ashes, creating a caustic substance that cleaned effectively, but was harsh on skin. It left your skin feeling tight and dry, sometimes even causing rashes or irritation with repeated use. Often it's just water and maybe some vinegar, which at least had some antibacterial properties, though no one understood why at the time. Roman hygiene practices were advanced for their time, with their elaborate bath complexes and aqueduct systems, but that advancement didn't extend to the lowest classes. The public baths existed, and technically you could visit them, but you'd be relegated to the dirtiest pools at the least popular times. And besides, you rarely had the time or the entry fee. You're expected to maintain some level of attractiveness, but the tools available to you are limited. Makeup exists, lead-based white powder for the face, to achieve the pale complexion that was fashionable, red ochre for the cheeks and lips to suggest health and vitality, kohl for the eyes to make them look larger and more alluring. But quality cosmetics cost money you don't have, and your owner might provide the bare minimum or might expect you to make do with even cheaper, more dangerous alternatives. That lead-based makeup, it's slowly poisoning you, causing neurological damage, kidney problems, and a host of other issues. But you don't know that. No one does. The Romans understand that some substances are poisonous in large doses, but the chronic effects of low-level exposure to toxic materials aren't understood. You just know that sometimes your hands shake, or you get headaches that won't go away, or your thinking becomes foggy. You attribute it to exhaustion or stress, never suspecting that the cosmetics you apply daily are contributing to your decline. Your hair needs attention. Roman beauty standards favour elaborate hairstyles, with wealthy women spending hours having enslaved hairdressers create complex arrangements of curls, braids, and artificial extensions. You don't have hours to spend arranging curls and braids, and you certainly don't have a personal hairdresser. You pull your hair back in the simplest style possible, maybe using a bit of oil to make it shine if any is available. The oil is rancid, olive oil that's gone bad, giving off a sour smell that you've learned to ignore. It's better than nothing, at least making your hair look somewhat cared for rather than completely neglected. Here's something your history classes definitely didn't mention. Contraception in ancient Rome was a nightmare of ineffective methods and dangerous practices. The Romans understood that intimate activity led to pregnancy, and they had various theories about how to prevent it, but their methods ranged from completely ineffective to actively harmful. You might use wool soaked in vinegar as a barrier. The acidity of the vinegar was thought to prevent conception, and while it might have had some minimal effect, it was nowhere near reliable, and the repeated exposure to vinegar caused irritation and inflammation. Other methods included drinking concoctions made from pennyroyal, an herb that could cause uterine contractions, or silphium, a now extinct plant that Romans believed was highly effective at preventing pregnancy. Silphium was so valued for this purpose that it was harvested to extinction by the 1st or 2nd century CE. Whether it actually worked is debated by historians, but Romans certainly believed it did. The problem is that effective herbal abortifacients are also poisons, and the line between a dose that prevents pregnancy and a dose that kills you is often very thin. If you did become pregnant despite these precautions, forced termination was common, and horrifically dangerous. Your owner couldn't have you out of commission for 9 months of pregnancy and then dealing with childbirth and an infant. That's nearly a year of lost revenue, unacceptable in his economic calculations. So pregnancies were terminated, involving either more potent herbal abortifacients that made you violently ill and could easily kill you, or crude physical methods. The infection rate from these procedures was astronomical, and many workers died from complications. Those who survived might be left with permanent damage that made future pregnancies even more dangerous. The morning meal, if you can call it that, consists of bread, likely stale, and maybe some watered wine or plain water. The bread is dark, coarse bread made from cheaper grains like barley mixed with wheat, or sometimes just barley alone. It's dense, hard, and occasionally contains bits of grit from stones in the grain grinding process. Sometimes you bite down and feel something that might be a weevil or other insect that infested the grain, but you've learned to ignore that. Protein is protein, however unappetizing the source. The food is basic sustenance, nothing more. Your owner isn't interested in your culinary satisfaction. He's interested in keeping you functional enough to work. The calculation is simple. What's the minimum nutrition required to keep a human body operating at the level needed for this work? That's what you get, with perhaps a tiny margin of safety to account for seasonal variations in food availability. If you're lucky, there might be some olives or cheese to supplement the bread. Olives were common in Roman diet and relatively cheap, providing some fat and flavour. Cheese, usually made from sheep or goat milk, was also fairly common and could last a long time without refrigeration if properly stored. If you're unlucky, the bread might have mould, but you've learned to cut around that or ignore it if the mould hasn't penetrated too deeply. Beggars can't be choosers, and you're effectively a beggar who doesn't even have the autonomy to beg. As you eat, standing up because there's no table or proper seating for workers, you're already thinking about the day ahead. The brothel will open soon, and clients will start arriving. Unlike the high-class courtesans called meretrices, who might entertain wealthy patrons in comfortable settings with actual beds, good food, and the pretense of genuine attraction, you're working in one of the cheaper establishments that serves common soldiers, labourers, and anyone who can scrape together a few bronze coins. These high-class courtesans, the ones who appear in literature and histories, occupied a completely different world. They might choose their clients, charge prices measured in gold rather than bronze, and even accumulate wealth and property. Some became famous, like Verania, who allegedly influenced political decisions, or the legendary courtesans of earlier Greek culture that Romans emulated. But for every one of these exceptional women, there were thousands of workers like you who would never be remembered, never have choices, never accumulate anything except trauma. The pricing is displayed outside. The going rate is typically 1 or 2 asses, the smallest denomination of Roman currency. For context, a loaf of bread costs about the same, 1 or 2 asses depending on size and quality. That's how much access to your services costs, the price of a loaf of bread. A litre of cheap wine costs about 2 asses. A simple meal at a tavern might cost 4 or 5 asses. You are cheaper than a meal, roughly equivalent to a drink, and you won't see any of that money. It all goes to your owner, who may have 20 of you working simultaneously, creating a river of bronze coins that flows entirely into his purse. You're not thinking about freedom, because freedom is an impossible dream when you're enslaved. The path to freedom for enslaved people in Rome was manumission, your owner voluntarily freeing you, which he had no incentive to do while you were still profitable. Some enslaved people could save money and buy their freedom, but you don't receive wages and have no opportunity to earn money on the side. You're generating revenue, just none of it for yourself. And even if you were technically free, working as a free worker rather than an enslaved one, the stigma of having worked in this profession would follow you forever. Roman law prohibited those in your profession from ever marrying citizens, even if they left the work. The status of infamis was permanent, a mark that couldn't be washed away. If you somehow accumulated money and tried to start a different life, any background check would reveal your past and doors would slam shut. Respectable businesses wouldn't hire you. Respectable families wouldn't associate with you. You were marked for life, which meant that even the theoretical possibility of leaving the profession was functionally meaningless. As the first light of dawn begins to filter into the main room of the brothel through the entrance, you take your place. This involves positioning yourself where potential clients can see you as they enter. Your cell door curtain is pulled back fully. A small lamp illuminates the interior, casting shadows on the suggestive frescoes painted on the walls, images that advertise the services available and enticed customers before they even entered a cell. These frescoes are actually quite common in Pompeii's preserved brothels, giving modern archaeologists detailed information about ancient Roman culture in sometimes uncomfortable detail. The images are explicit and varied, showing different scenarios. You weren't consulted about this decor, obviously. It's just another aspect of your objectification, your cell decorated with images to enhance the client's experience, without any regard for how you might feel having to look at them all day, every day. The day is about to begin, and you have no choice but to face it. You paste on the expression you've learned to wear, a slight smile that suggests availability and eagerness without looking too desperate or too indifferent. It's a careful calibration, because clients have expectations. They want you to seem pleased to see them, excited about the prospect, grateful for their business. The performance begins before they even approach you, and it won't end until the brothel closes for your brief rest period. You can hear the sounds of Rome waking up more clearly now. Merchants are calling out their wares, wagons are rumbling over the cobblestones, making deliveries or heading to market. Children are running through the streets, probably on their way to schools or apprenticeships if they're lucky, or to whatever work their families have found for them if they're not. Free people are starting their day with choices, where to go, what to buy, how to spend their time. You're starting your day with none. The wooden bolt on the main door scrapes back. Quintus is opening for business. The first clients of the day will arrive within minutes. They're often waiting outside, eager to conduct their business before heading to their own jobs or responsibilities. Your heart rate increases slightly, a physiological stress response that you've learned to suppress and ignore. There's no point in being anxious. Anxiety won't change what's about to happen. Nothing will change what's about to happen. This is your reality. This is what you wouldn't survive, not because a single day would kill you, but because the accumulation of days just like this one stretching out indefinitely into a future with no hope of escape or improvement would break something fundamental in your spirit long before your body finally gave out. The first client is walking through the door. Chapter 2. The business opens. Your first clients of the day. The streets of Rome are coming alive with the characteristic sounds of urban life in the ancient world. You can hear them filtering into the brothel. Merchants setting up their stalls, competing to see who can shout loudest about their superior produce or goods. Wagons rumbling over cobblestones with their loads of goods from across the empire. People shouting greetings and insults in equal measure. Sometimes in Latin, sometimes in Greek, occasionally in the countless other languages spoken by Rome's cosmopolitan population. The city is a cacophony, and it never truly stops. The lupanarium you work in is located in the Subura, one of Rome's poorest and most dangerous neighborhoods. The Subura was infamous throughout the empire as a place of vice, poverty, and violence. It was cramped, with buildings rising 6 or 7 stories high, despite frequent collapses, filthy beyond modern comprehension, and prone to devastating fires that swept through the wooden structures regularly. Yet it was also absolutely teeming with life. Brothels, taverns, gambling establishments, street food vendors, and other businesses that catered to the city's baser needs and desires. The Subura was located in a valley between the Esquiline and Viminal hills, and its low-lying position meant it flooded regularly when the sewers backed up, or when heavy rains overwhelmed the drainage systems. The smell alone would be overwhelming to modern sensibilities. Human and animal waste, rotting food, industrial effluent from nearby workshops, smoke from countless cooking fires and workshops, all trapped in the narrow streets by tall buildings that blocked air circulation. You've become nose-blind to most of it, registering the smell only when something particularly pungent cuts through the general miasma. Your establishment isn't even hiding what it is. Above the entrance is a large stone phallus, a common sign for brothels in ancient Rome. The phallus wasn't just decorative or advertising. It was believed to ward off evil and bring good fortune, serving as a protective symbol. You can find these carved into walls, hung above doorways, and even paved into streets throughout Roman cities. The irony of a good luck charm hanging above a place where fortune has clearly abandoned everyone inside would be amusing if it weren't so bleak. The Leno who owns this establishment is already awake and positioning himself near the entrance. His name is Marcus Tullius Felix. The Felix part, meaning lucky, was probably adopted when he gained his freedom, a common practice for freedmen to take optimistic names. He's a former slave himself who managed to buy his freedom and then scrape together enough money through various hustles and possibly crime to purchase this building and the people working in it. Don't mistake his background for empathy. If anything, his own experience of slavery has made him more ruthless rather than more compassionate. He knows exactly what it's like to be property, which means he knows exactly how to extract maximum value from his human inventory. He treats his workers with the casual cruelty of someone who sees human beings as nothing more than revenue streams. You're not people to him, you're investments that need to generate returns. Felix is in his 40s, heavyset from eating better than his workers, with the kind of calculating eyes that are always assessing value and opportunity. He dresses slightly better than his means, a conscious choice to project success and respectability, despite being in a profession that marks him as infamous, just like the workers he exploits. He wants to appear as a successful businessman, not as the parasite he actually is. The first client arrives before the sun has fully risen. He's a regular. You recognize him immediately, even though you've never learned his name. He's a labourer who works at one of the nearby construction sites rebuilding parts of the city. Emperor Hadrian's building projects have created employment for thousands of workers, and many of them are in this neighbourhood. This particular client has calloused hands that scratch your skin, smells like sweat and stone dust even first thing in the morning, and has exactly 2 asses to spend. This is his routine. Before heading to work, he stops here. The transaction is depressingly efficient. You lead him to your cell, which involves walking perhaps 15 feet from the main room. There's no small talk, no pretense of connection. He's not here for conversation, and you're not here to provide it. The stone bench in your cell, because yes, you conduct business on a stone bench covered with that thin mattress, serves its purpose. The bench is built directly into the wall, immovable, designed to withstand the constant use it receives. The entire encounter lasts maybe 5 to 10 minutes. You've learned to perform enthusiasm convincingly, making the small sounds and movements that clients expect, creating the fiction that you're enjoying this as much as they are. It's pure performance, but a necessary one. Clients who feel they receive good service are more likely to return, and they're less likely to complain to your owner or take out their disappointment through violence. He finishes, adjusts his tunic with the practiced efficiency of someone who does this regularly, drops his 2 bronze coins in the collection box by the entrance on his way out, a wooden box with a slot in the top that Felix monitors constantly and leaves without a backward glance. To him, this was a simple transaction, no different than buying bread or paying for a haircut. To you, it's the first of many identical experiences you'll have today, each one taking a small piece of whatever humanity you have left. You don't have time to process or recover. There's a quick rinse with cold water from a basin kept in your cell for exactly this purpose, a small ceramic basin. That holds maybe a litre of water. You pour some of the water over your hands, splash some on your face, and use a rough cloth to wipe yourself down as best you can. The water is already cold and will get colder throughout the day as the basin sits in the unheated cell. You'll refill it from the communal supply a few times before the day is over, and you're back in position, curtain pulled aside, lamp glowing invitingly, expression fixed in that careful smile of availability. The next client is already waiting, having watched the first one leave and decided to take his turn. This is the rhythm of your day, a constant stream of men from all walks of Roman life. Soldiers on leave spending their military pay, which comes to them 3 times a year in lump sums that they often spend quickly and carelessly. Merchants taking a break from their shops, having left enslaved workers or family members to mind the business while they take care of their personal needs. Enslaved men sneaking away from their masters' households, having saved up coins from whatever small earnings they were allowed to keep, or having stolen them outright. Freedmen celebrating some small success, or just indulging themselves, and occasionally someone wealthier slumming it in the Suburra for the thrill of mixing with the lower classes, for the exotic experience of visiting the kinds of establishments that existed but were publicly disapproved of. Each client brings his own particular challenges and characteristics. Some are rough, with no regard for your comfort or safety, treating your body like an object to be used forcefully because they've paid for the privilege. Some are drunk, even this early in the day, which makes them unpredictable and sometimes violent. Drunk men are dangerous. They might become aggressive, they might fail to perform and blame you for it. They might fall asleep in your cell and create awkward situations with clients waiting. Some are nervous first-timers who don't really know what they're doing, fumbling and uncertain, which creates a different kind of discomfort. You're expected to guide them through the experience, which requires a delicate balance of being helpful without seeming too experienced or jaded. Some are old men seeking to prove they still can, desperately trying to recapture youth or virility, often failing and becoming angry or depressed. Each one sees you as an object, a tool for their temporary pleasure. They don't wonder how you're feeling, or whether you slept well or if you're in pain. Those questions are irrelevant to the transaction. They've paid their 1 or 2 asses and they expect to receive the service advertised. Your humanity is not part of the purchase. The physical toll accumulates quickly. Your body isn't designed for this level of continuous activity without rest and recovery. You're developing chronic pain in places you didn't know could hurt. The constant physical trauma is creating problems that will worsen over time, muscle strains that never heal properly, joint issues from repeated stress, internal damage from the sheer volume and frequency of encounters. Small injuries don't get time to heal before they're aggravated again. A small tear becomes a larger one. Bruising that needs days to fade is replaced with new bruising before the old has disappeared. Soreness that needs rest to improve only gets worse with continued activity. Your body is in a state of constant degradation, breaking down faster than it can repair itself. Here's something else that's important to understand. Consent doesn't exist for you in any meaningful way. The concept of consent, as we understand it today, enthusiastic, informed agreement that can be withdrawn at any time, is completely absent from this transaction. You can't refuse a client unless your owner decides that client is too dangerous or too broke to be worth the trouble. The decision isn't yours to make. You can't set boundaries about what you will or won't do. If a client has a specific request, you're expected to accommodate it unless it's something so extreme or dangerous that it might damage you to the point of affecting your ability to continue working. And even then, the decision about whether to refuse is your owner's, not yours. He'll weigh the extra money he might charge for special services against the risk of injury to his property. You can't even control the pace of your work. If there's a line of customers waiting, and there often is during busy periods, you see them all, regardless of how you're feeling physically or emotionally. There's no, I need a break, or I can't do this right now. You work until your owner says you can stop, and he determines that based entirely on business considerations, not on your well-being. The risk of disease is constant and terrifying. Sexually transmitted infections exist in ancient Rome, though they don't understand what causes them or how to treat them effectively. The germ theory of disease won't be developed for nearly 2,000 years. Romans have theories about disease, bad air, imbalances of humours, divine punishment, but none of these theories lead to effective prevention or treatment of STIs. Whether syphilis existed in Europe before Columbus's voyages to the Americas is still debated by historians and medical researchers, but other infections definitely plagued ancient populations. Gonorrhea, chlamydia, genital herpes, and other infections are present and spreading. You have no protection against them. The concept of barrier protection exists in rudimentary form. Some men might use linen sheaths, though these were more for pregnancy prevention than disease prevention and were uncommon among the poor, but most clients use nothing. Treatments for these diseases range from ineffective to actively harmful. Mercury compounds might be applied to sores, slowly poisoning you while doing little to address the underlying infection. Various herbal preparations promised cures but delivered nothing. Prayer and sacrifice to the gods Asclepius or Apollo might be attempted, but mostly you just suffered through the symptoms and hoped your body would fight off the infection, which sometimes it did and sometimes it didn't. Between clients, you can hear the other workers in their cells. The walls are thin, basically just wooden partitions or heavy curtains separating one cell from another. Privacy is an illusion. You hear everything happening in the adjacent cells, just as they hear everything happening in yours. Sometimes there's laughter, dark, gallows humour about a particularly awkward client or absurd situation. One worker might mimic a client's ridiculous dirty talk or describe some humiliating thing that happened, and others will laugh because if you don't laugh, you'll cry. Sometimes there's crying, quickly stifled because showing emotional weakness can make you a target for both clients and your owner. Clients might be aroused by tears, seeing them as evidence of domination, which makes the experience worse. Your owner might see emotional instability as a liability, something that could affect your ability to perform or drive away customers. So crying happens privately, muffled into thin mattresses or disguised as something else. Sometimes there's silence, which might be the most disturbing sound of all. You know someone is in there with a client, but you hear nothing. No sounds of activity, no conversation, nothing. That silence can mean many things, few of them good. Maybe the client is violent and has physically silenced the worker. Maybe the worker has completely dissociated, checked out mentally to the point where they're not making any sounds at all. Maybe it's a client with particular tastes that don't involve the usual sounds. The silence makes you wonder and worry, but you can't stop working to check on them. The graffiti on your walls grows throughout the day. Clients write their names with pieces of charcoal or chalk, bragging about their prowess or leaving messages for friends who might visit later. Some of this graffiti is crudely poetic, attempts at erotic verse or declarations of conquest, written in rough Latin. More of it is just names and numbers, tallies of conquests. Gaius was here. Felix fucked Primigenia. I had 3 girls today. You are the conquest being tallied, reduced to a hash mark on someone's wall of achievements. Some of this graffiti has actually survived to the present day in places like Pompeii, preserved by the volcanic ash that buried the city in 79 CE. Archaeologists have found these messages and catalogued them, offering uncomfortable glimpses into this aspect of Roman life. One famous piece of graffiti from a Pompeii brothel reads, "Hic ego puellas multas futui," "Here I fucked many girls." It's written with the casual pride of someone marking their territory, with zero regard for the humanity of the girls involved. Another reads, "Fortunata was good," a review essentially rating a worker's performance. Still another, "Secundus took a shit here," because apparently some people felt compelled to document their bowel movements in brothels. The graffiti is a strange mixture of the mundane and the degrading, all of it treating the space and the people in it as public property to be marked and claimed. The lighting in your cell never gets better. Even at midday when the sun is highest, it's dim, the cell has no window, and your only light source is the single oil lamp that burns continuously. Oil lamps are expensive to maintain. Olive oil isn't cheap, even the lower grades used for lighting, and your owner isn't going to waste money on proper lighting for the cells. One small lamp is sufficient to see what needs to be seen and no more. You work in perpetual twilight, which is probably a mercy. You don't need to see the faces of your clients too clearly, and they don't need to see the bruises forming on your arms and legs, the exhaustion written in every line of your face, or the emptiness in your eyes. The dim lighting obscures the reality of the situation, allowing clients to maintain their fantasy that this is somehow mutual, that you're enjoying yourself, that this is anything other than commercial exploitation of desperate human beings. The sounds from the street filter in constantly, proof that life continues outside these walls in ways you can barely imagine anymore. Free people are conducting business, having conversations about politics or philosophy, making choices about their day. Children are playing, their laughter piercing through the general noise. Merchants are haggling over prices, exercising economic agency that you'll never have. People are living full human lives while you're reduced to a single function, repeated endlessly. You have no choices. Your day is determined entirely by the number of men willing to pay a couple of bronze coins. You can't decide to take a break when you're tired. You can't refuse a client who disgusts you. You can't choose to do different work or to work fewer hours. Every aspect of your existence is controlled by others. Your owner determines your schedule and conditions. Clients determine your immediate activities. Roman law determines your status and lack of rights. Food arrives sometime around midday. More bread, maybe some thin soup or porridge. The soup, when it appears, is mostly water with some vegetables, and occasionally small pieces of cheap meat or fish. It's more about adding liquid and salt to your diet than providing substantial nutrition. You eat quickly between clients, standing up in the corridor if there's a brief lull, barely tasting it. It's fuel, nothing more. Your body needs energy to continue functioning, and the food provides that in the most minimal way possible. The brothel doesn't close for a lunch break. Unlike many Roman businesses that might shut down during the hottest part of the day, allowing workers to rest and avoid the midday heat, the brothel operates continuously. If anything, midday brings its own particular wave of clients, men on their lunch breaks from nearby workshops and businesses, grabbing a quick encounter before returning to work. Your owner, Felix, stops by periodically to collect the coins from the box and to check on his investment. He doesn't ask how you're feeling. He might notice if you look sick enough to scare off customers, if you're visibly feverish, if you're bleeding from somewhere you shouldn't be, if you're so pale and shaky that you look like you might collapse. In those cases, you might get the rest of the day off, without compensation of course, since you don't receive wages anyway. More likely he'll just tell you to wash your face, tie your hair back differently, adjust your tunic to be more revealing, and get back to work. His concern is purely economic. You're a capital asset that needs to generate returns. Maintenance is important only insofar as it preserves the asset's productive capacity. The afternoon brings a different crowd. Morning clients tend to be workers getting their business done before their day starts. Afternoon clients tend to be men with more time on their hands, the wealthy who have nothing better to do than tour the seedier parts of Rome for entertainment, unemployed men living off family money or patron support, students from wealthy families skipping their lessons, and various others whose social position allows for leisure. These afternoon clients are often the worst because they view you as an exotic experience, something to tell their friends about later over wine at a dinner party. They might request specific acts or scenarios treating the experience like theatre, where they're both audience and participant. They might bring friends and make a group activity out of it, encouraging each other and treating the whole thing like a game. They sometimes negotiate for lower prices despite having more money than the morning clients, viewing the haggling as part of the entertainment. Felix usually holds firm on pricing, but occasionally he'll make deals for volume, multiple workers, extended time, special requests that command premium pricing. Your discomfort or preferences are never part of these negotiations. You've developed coping mechanisms, as all survivors do. You've learned to separate your mind from your body, to go somewhere else mentally while your body performs its required functions. This dissociative state isn't something you consciously chose to develop. It's a natural psychological defense mechanism against sustained trauma. Your mind protects itself by creating distance from the experience, observing from outside rather than being fully present for the violation. You've learned which expressions and sounds clients expect and how to fake enthusiasm convincingly enough that they don't complain or become violent. You've learned the moans and gasps that suggest pleasure, the movements that imply eager participation, the facial expressions that convey desire rather than endurance. It's all performance, a script you've memorized through repetition. You've learned to spot the dangerous ones, the ones who get aroused by inflicting pain, whose eyes light up when you flinch, who grip harder when you pull away. You can often identify them within the first few seconds of interaction, something in their demeanor or the way they look at you. When you spot one, you try to alert Quintus, the enforcer your owner employs to maintain order, but he's not always available and not always willing to intervene. Quintus is a large, brutal man whose job is to handle clients who get too violent or refuse to pay. He's probably in his 30s, a freedman who was formerly an arena fighter, or perhaps a soldier, someone comfortable with violence and intimidation. He also makes sure none of the workers try to run, positioning himself at strategic points where he can watch the entrance and the corridor. Where would you run to anyway? You have no money hidden away. You have no legal identity if you're enslaved, making you subject to immediate recapture. You have no family to take you in. Either they sold you into this, or they're too poor to shelter a runaway. The stigma of prostitution marks you forever, meaning no respectable household would employ you even if you somehow escaped. Running means almost certain death or recapture, and probably a severe beating to discourage others from trying the same thing. You've heard stories of workers who tried to escape and were caught. The punishments are brutal and public, designed to terrorize the rest of you into compliance. Maybe they're whipped, maybe they're branded on the face, destroying whatever value they had as prostitutes and condemning them to even worse forms of slavery. Maybe they're sold to brothels in distant provinces, or to mines where life expectancy is measured in months. Maybe they simply disappear, and everyone understands what that means. As the afternoon wears on toward evening, you've already seen more clients than you can count. 20? 30? You stopped keeping track because the number is meaningless and depressing. Your body is screaming in protest. The physical exhaustion is compounded by the emotional and psychological toll of being used as an object over and over and over, with no break, no kindness, no acknowledgement of your humanity. But the day is far from over. Evening is when the brothel gets truly busy, when the real money is made, when the crowds arrive and your suffering reaches its peak intensity. Chapter 3. Evening Rush, when business peaks and humanity disappears. As the sun begins its descent over the 7 hills of Rome, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that you can't see from inside your windowless cell, the Subura transforms. The respectable citizens who might have been conducting legitimate business during the day retreat to their homes on the hills or in better neighborhoods. The Subura reveals its true character after dark. Torches are lit along the streets, casting dancing shadows on the cramped buildings that lean drunkenly against each other. The smell of burning pitch from the torches mingles with cooking food, human waste, and the perpetual stench of too many people living in too little space. The taverns open their doors wide, and the smell of cheap wine becomes overpowering. You can hear the clattering of dice on gaming tables, the shouts of winners and losers, the sounds of fights breaking out and being broken up by tavern owners or the vigiles, if they bother to respond. For you, this is when the real work begins. The evening brings the largest crowds, the drunkest clients, and the most dangerous situations. Men who have spent the day working, soldiers returning to barracks, labourers finishing construction shifts, craftsmen closing their workshops, merchants counting their day's earnings, now have time and a few coins to spend. They flood into establishments like yours, often in groups, already half drunk from hitting the taverns first. The atmosphere in the brothel shifts noticeably. During the day, transactions were quick and mechanical, businesslike in their efficiency. Now there's a party atmosphere that makes everything worse. Groups of men laugh loudly, their voices echoing off the stone walls. They compare notes on which workers they prefer, discussing your bodies and performances like livestock being evaluated at market. They make crude jokes that echo through the building, finding humour in the degradation that is your daily reality. You're not a person to them even in the abstract. You're a commodity to be evaluated and consumed, like a cut of meat at the butcher's or a jug of wine at the tavern. They debate your merits versus those of other workers, discussing physical attributes and performance characteristics with the detached analytical tone of people making a purchase decision. And that's exactly what they're doing, deciding which piece of merchandise offers the best value for their coins. Your owner, Felix, loves this time of day. This is when he makes the most money, when the coins flow fastest into his collection box. He's added extra oil lamps to the main area where clients wait their turn, making it easier for them to see the options available. The additional light costs money and oil, but Felix has calculated that better lit merchandise sells faster and commands slightly better prices. Some of the workers are called out to stand in this main space, turning slowly so potential clients can evaluate them from all angles. It's a livestock auction, except the animals are human beings. You've been selected for this display before, and you hate it with an intensity that you usually try to suppress. Standing there, rotating slowly while men look you over, make comments about your body, sometimes reach out to touch or grab to test the merchandise. It's degrading in a way that's somehow worse than the actual transactions in the cells. At least in your cell, the lights are dim and the interaction is brief. In the main room, you're on full display, objectified in bright light, while maintaining that performance of availability and enthusiasm. You have to smile while men debate your worth, have to appear grateful for their attention, have to pretend that being evaluated like livestock is perfectly acceptable and even exciting to you. The pricing structure shifts slightly in the evening. Busier times mean your owner can charge a bit more, maybe 3 or 4 asses, instead of 1 or 2. It's still desperately cheap by any reasonable standard, but it represents a 50 to 100% increase over daytime pricing. Felix has calculated that men in groups, especially drunk men, are less likely to haggle over price. The social dynamic of being in a group makes them spend more freely, showing off to their companions, or simply not wanting to appear cheap in front of friends. They're also more likely to request multiple workers or specific combinations, which drives up revenue. 2 friends might want to share a cell with 1 worker, or they might each want their own worker, but want the cells adjacent so they can talk to each other during the encounters. Some request 2 workers simultaneously, paying double the rate for the fantasy of group participation. Your owner accommodates all of these requests, calculating the optimal allocation of workers to maximize revenue. You're exhausted before the evening rush even properly begins, but there's no possibility of rest. If anything, the pace increases. The time between clients shrinks to almost nothing. Rinse with cold water that's getting filthy from repeated use. Return to position, next client. Quick rinse. Force the smile back onto your face, next client. The water in your basin is grey now, barely cleaner than not washing at all, but it's what you have. Your body is operating on autopilot, going through motions it has performed so many times that conscious thought is barely required. Your mind has retreated to some protected space deep inside, observing from a distance as your body does what's required of it. This dissociation is complete now, the separation between consciousness and physical experience nearly total. The clients themselves become a blur of faces, young and old, handsome and ugly, Roman citizens and foreigners, though you're not really looking at their faces anyway. They blend together into an endless succession of anonymous male bodies, each one taking what they've paid for and leaving. You've learned that making eye contact can be dangerous. Some men interpret it as invitation for more than they paid for, a suggestion that you're interested in them personally, rather than just performing a job. Others get angry if you make eye contact, as if you're not allowed to look at them as equals even in this degrading context. They'll grab your face and turn it away, or tell you to close your eyes, or in some cases become violent because they interpret your gaze as judgment or mockery. It's safer to keep your eyes downcast, focused on nothing in particular, present enough to perform your function, but absent enough to avoid provoking negative reactions. Violence becomes more likely as the night progresses, and the clients get drunker. A man who has been drinking heavily loses whatever thin veneer of civilization might have restrained him during daylight hours. The wine disinhibits, removing social conditioning about acceptable behavior. He might decide he wants to do things he didn't pay for. He might get rough, leaving bruises on your arms where he grabbed too hard, on your throat where he squeezed, on your thighs where he forced you into positions you didn't want. He might decide to hit you because it excites him, because the power to inflict pain is itself arousing to him. Or he might hit you because you didn't perform enthusiasm convincingly enough, because some micro-expression on your face revealed your actual disgust or pain, and he found that offensive. Or he might hit you for no reason at all except that he can, that you're property and he's paid for temporary use of that property, and who's going to stop him? The enforcer, Quintus, is busier during evening hours, intervening in cells when things sound like they're getting out of hand. You hear him sometimes, his heavy footsteps in the corridor, his gruff voice telling a client to calm down or get out. But his protection has limits. He's there to preserve the owner's property and ensure payment, not to safeguard your dignity or well-being beyond their market value. If a client is wealthy enough or dangerous enough, the enforcer might look the other way regarding behavior that would normally result in ejection. A wealthy client might tip generously for the privilege of being rougher than usual, and Quintus will accept that calculation. A dangerous client, perhaps a soldier with his friends, armed and violent, might be someone Quintus decides isn't worth confronting unless absolutely necessary. The other workers are all occupied in their cells, creating a symphony of sounds that would be comical if the reality weren't so grim. The walls are thin, offering no sound insulation, so everything carries. You hear the grunting of clients, the rhythmic sounds of mattresses shifting on stone benches, the occasional cry of pain that someone tried to stifle but couldn't quite manage, the fake sounds of pleasure that workers make because clients expect them. You can tell by the sounds alone which cells house clients who are being violent, which ones are proceeding normally, which ones have clients who are taking longer than usual. You've developed this skill over time, learning to read the auditory landscape of the brothel. It's useful information. If you hear something particularly disturbing, you might try to position yourself where that client can't easily select you next, though your ability to actually avoid specific clients is limited. Between sessions, in those brief moments of transition when one client has left and the next is approaching, you might catch a glimpse of one of the other women in the corridor. You don't talk much anymore. What is there to say that hasn't been said 1,000 times? You all know what the others are experiencing, because you're experiencing it too, every day, in an endless cycle of exploitation. Sometimes a shared glance conveys more than words could, a moment of recognition that you're both human, beings trapped in an inhuman situation. Sometimes it's a warning look, a quick gesture toward a particular client to indicate danger. Sometimes it's just mutual acknowledgement of survival, a brief connection before you both return to the performance of your roles. The graffiti writers are particularly active in the evenings. Drunk men love to leave their mark, literally and figuratively. They scrawl their conquests on your walls with pieces of charcoal or chalk provided by Felix for exactly this purpose. He's found that clients enjoy leaving messages and are more likely to return to a brothel where they can document their visits. They add to the layers of text already there, sometimes writing over previous messages, creating a palimpsest of sexual boasting. Some of it is almost poetic in a crude way. Sweet Daphne gave me pleasure beyond measure. More of it is just names and numbers. Lucius III indicating someone's third visit, or Marcus plus Prima like some ancient version of carving initials on a tree, except the tree is a human being commemorated as a conquest. Still others are insults directed at rivals. Gaius has a small dick and can't satisfy anyone. The walls are covered, every available surface decorated with the evidence of your objectification. Food is available again, brought around by one of Quintus's assistants, usually an older woman who helps with basic maintenance tasks. It's the same as before, more stale bread, maybe some onions if you're lucky. Water that tastes like the ceramic vessel it's been sitting in all day, picking up minerals and developing an unpleasant flatness. You eat quickly between clients if you can, standing up in the corridor during a brief lull, taking a bite of bread before the next client arrives. More often, you're eating between clients in the few seconds available, taking a bite before entering your cell, chewing quickly and swallowing before you have to fix your expression and begin the performance again, trying to maintain enough energy to keep functioning despite having burned thousands of calories and gotten minimal nutrition to replace them. The physical degradation is reaching critical levels. Your body is covered in small hurts that are adding up to big problems, bruises in various stages of healing, creating a mottled pattern on your skin, scratches from rough handling or from men with dirty fingernails, soreness in every muscle group from sustained exertion without proper recovery time. The areas subjected to the most trauma are beyond sore. They're actively painful in ways that make you want to scream. But you can't scream. You can't show weakness. You can't be anything except available and willing, or at least able to convincingly fake willingness. The pain has to be hidden behind the performance. suppressed and ignored like everything else you actually feel. The psychological toll is harder to describe, but just as devastating. There's a disconnection happening, a splitting of self that trauma psychologists wouldn't identify or name for nearly 2,000 years, but that you're experiencing nonetheless. The person experiencing these things isn't really you anymore, can't be you, because you couldn't survive if you remained fully present for every violation. You've constructed a mental wall between your true self, whatever's left of it, buried deep where the trauma can't reach, and the body that's being used. You've created an internal separation where part of you observes from a distance while another part performs the required functions. It's the only way to survive without going completely mad, though whether this survival strategy itself is a form of madness is a question you don't have the luxury of contemplating. Roman society has interesting contradictions when it comes to sexuality and prostitution. Public morality officially frowned upon excessive sexual indulgence. The ideal Roman man was supposed to exercise self-control, moderation in all things, including sexual behavior. Excessive pursuit of pleasure was seen as weak, unmanly, characteristic of Greeks and Easterners, rather than virtuous Romans. There were laws about proper sexual conduct for citizens. Roman citizens, especially citizen women, were protected by laws against sexual assault and adultery. A Roman father had the legal right to kill a daughter caught in adultery along with her lover. The laws were extensive and specific about who could have sexual relations with whom, under what circumstances. But those same laws specifically exempted prostitutes and enslaved people from protection. You occupied a legal category where almost anything could be done to you without legal consequence to the perpetrator. A citizen couldn't be prosecuted for raping a prostitute because the concept didn't legally apply. You were deemed to have consented to all sexual activity by virtue of your profession. The philosophical schools debated whether using prostitutes was morally acceptable. The Stoics, who believed in self-mastery and living according to reason, generally advised moderation in all things, including sexual activity. They didn't necessarily condemn visiting prostitutes, but they counseled against becoming enslaved to sexual desires. The ideal Stoic should be able to take or leave such pleasures, using them temperately rather than being controlled by them. The Epicureans, despite popular misunderstanding of their philosophy, actually advised against pursuing sexual pleasures too vigorously. They distinguished between necessary pleasures, food when hungry, water when thirsty, and unnecessary pleasures, luxurious food, sexual variety. Unnecessary pleasures could lead to suffering when they became cravings, so the wise Epicurean would minimize dependence on them. But these philosophical debates had little practical impact on behavior. Some philosophers argued it was actually preferable for young men to use prostitutes rather than seduce citizen women and risk social complications, unwanted pregnancies with respectable families, or challenges to the honor of other citizens. You were considered a kind of necessary evil, a release valve for male desires that might otherwise disrupt the social order. Your suffering was the price of that social stability, and no one in power particularly cared about that price. The system worked for them. Men got sexual access without the complications of relationships. The state collected taxes. Owners like Felix made profits. And the human cost to you and your fellow workers was externalized, not counted in the social calculus. Evening transitions into night, but the brothel doesn't close. Rome is a city that never fully sleeps, especially in neighborhoods like the Subura. There are always people awake, always businesses operating, always activities happening. Establishments like yours can operate at all hours, and Felix keeps the doors open as long as clients keep arriving with coins to spend. The crowd shifts again as true night settles. Now it's men just getting off later shifts, sailors from the port city of Ostia, who have made the 15-mile journey inland to Rome for entertainment, sometimes soldiers changing guard duty or finishing evening patrols. The work continues without pause, without mercy, without end. You've lost count of how many clients you've seen today. The number is somewhere north of 40, maybe approaching 50. But you stop tracking because the number is meaningless. Knowing you've been used 43 times versus 47 times doesn't change anything. Each one blurs into the next, a succession of anonymous bodies and demands and brief, joyless transactions. Your owner keeps detailed track for accounting purposes, maintaining records of revenue and calculating which workers generate the most income per day. These records are important for tax purposes. The state, tax collectors will want their share, and for his own business planning. But the numbers are just numbers to him, units of revenue rather than experiences of human suffering. The younger workers, the newest additions to the brothel, are struggling visibly. The initial shock of the first few days has worn off, replaced by the grinding horror of understanding that this is now their daily reality with no end in sight. You can hear one of them crying in her cell despite having a client with her. The sounds are unmistakable, gasping sobs that she's trying to suppress. You know the client is either ignoring her tears, completely oblivious to her distress because he's too drunk or too focused on his own satisfaction to notice or care, or possibly getting off on them, aroused by her obvious suffering because it confirms his power over her. Some men are like that. They're specifically attracted to the knowledge that they're causing pain, that their pleasure comes at the cost of someone else's suffering. There's nothing you can do to help her. You're all drowning in the same sea, and there are no life rafts, no rescue coming. The best you can hope for is that she develops the same dissociative coping mechanisms you have, that she learns to separate her mind from her body and survive by abandoning full presence in the experience. The alternative is madness or death, and while death might be a mercy, it's not something you can facilitate for her even if you wanted to. Somewhere in the city, in a completely different Rome that might as well exist on a different planet, wealthy Romans are reclining at elaborate dinner parties. They're lying on comfortable couches arranged around tables laden with exotic foods, oysters from Britannia, peacock from North Africa, wine from Greece or Gaul, fruits and vegetables from across the empire. Enslaved servants attend to their every need, bringing course after course of elaborate dishes. They're discussing philosophy and poetry, debating the merits of different literary styles. Maybe they're analysing the latest works of writers like Juvenal or discussing the poetry of Virgil and Ovid. They're arguing about political developments in the Senate, speculating about the emperor's intentions, discussing administrative appointments and policy changes. They're living lives of comfort and intellectual stimulation, their biggest worry being social standing, or whether their newest acquisition of art or sculpture is genuine versus a copy. That world exists in the same city as yours, sometimes only a mile or two away geographically, but it might as well be on a different continent. The Rome of marble temples and grand forums, of philosophical discourse and civilized debate, has nothing to do with the Rome of stone cells and desperate survival. The empire that built aqueducts and roads and conquered territories from Britannia to Syria is the same empire that allows human beings to be sold for sexual use at the price of a loaf of bread. The disconnect is total and intentional. The wealthy and powerful benefit from your exploitation, some directly as clients, others indirectly as taxpayers receiving revenue from the taxes on prostitution, still others as owners and investors in the industry. The system works for them, so they maintain it, creating elaborate philosophical and legal justifications for why it's acceptable and necessary. The night deepens, and still the clients come. You can feel your body starting to shut down, moving towards some kind of physical crisis point where it simply can't continue, but you push through because you have no choice. The alternative to continuing is punishment, beating, denial of the small amount of food you receive, possibly being sold to a worse situation. So you continue. Another client, another performance, another violation. The night stretches ahead, endless and dark. Chapter 4. The deepest hours, surviving until dawn. The rhythm of the brothel changes as true. Night settles over Rome like a heavy blanket. The city's noise diminishes but never fully disappears. Even at the darkest hours you can hear the watchmen calling the time, the occasional fight breaking out in nearby taverns, dogs barking at shadows, the rumble of carts bringing goods into the city under cover of darkness to avoid daytime traffic restrictions. The crowds thin out somewhat as the night wears on, but you're still working. The clients who arrive in these deepest hours tend to be the most desperate or the most dangerous, men who couldn't come earlier for various reasons, many of them involving situations you'd rather not think about too deeply. Some are married men sneaking away from their homes while their wives sleep. Some are criminals who conduct their business in darkness. Some are night workers finishing shifts, bakers, vigiles, workers in industries that operate around the clock. The temperature has dropped significantly. Rome's mild. Climate is a blessing compared to the northern provinces where soldiers serve in snow and ice. But winter nights in a stone building with no heating are brutally cold nonetheless. The temperature might be in the 40s Fahrenheit, and your thin tunic provides almost no warmth. Your body generates some heat through activity, but between clients, the cold seeps into your bones. The brief body heat from clients is the only source of warmth you get, which adds another layer of degradation to the entire experience. Being grateful for the proximity of people using you, because at least they're warm. It's a perverse kind of silver lining that makes you hate yourself for even noticing it. But when you're this cold for this long, you notice any source of heat, regardless of where it comes from. The oil lamps are burning low now. Felix is frugal about replacing them in the middle of the night. Oil costs money, and he's calculated that fewer clients arrive during these hours, so the return on investment for bright lighting decreases. The brothel becomes even dimmer, the shadows deeper, the light from the remaining lamps barely pushing back the darkness. The darkness is both blessing and curse. You can't see as much of what's happening, which means you're spared some visual details you'd rather not remember. But neither can your clients see you as clearly, which means you can't read their expressions or intentions as well. Dangerous clients become harder to identify before they act on their dangerous impulses. You're operating in a state beyond normal exhaustion. This isn't the tiredness of a long day of honest work. This is the complete depletion that comes from sustained physical and psychological trauma without rest or recovery. Your body has moved into a kind of survival mode where it keeps functioning through sheer biological necessity, but everything hurts and nothing feels real anymore. The dissociation you began experiencing in the evening has deepened into something approaching a fugue state. You're watching yourself from a great distance, a spectator to your own exploitation. The person in that cell, performing those acts, experiencing those violations, that's not really you. It can't be you, because acknowledging that it's you would mean accepting an identity as a thing being used, rather than a person with agency. A client arrives who is clearly one of the urban poor, someone who has saved up for weeks or even months to afford even this cheapest of pleasures. His clothes are little better than rags, patched and repatched until the original fabric is barely visible. His hands show signs of hard labour, calloused and scarred. He probably works one of the most back-breaking jobs in Rome, maybe hauling goods at the docks or working in a fulling operation trampling clothes in vats of urine and other chemicals, or one of countless other brutal occupations that destroy the body over time. His desperation is palpable, which makes the interaction somehow more sad than the others. He's not some wealthy citizen slumming it for thrills, not a soldier spending his pay carelessly. He's someone at the bottom of Roman society who has sacrificed other needs, food perhaps, or warm clothing, or medicine, to afford this brief escape from his own misery. The system that oppresses you also oppresses him, just in different ways. He's probably free, which gives him legal rights and social standing that you don't have, but he's still trapped in a life of poverty and hard labour with limited prospects for improvement. The difference is that he still has more power than you do, because he can leave when the transaction is complete, and you cannot. He has choices about how to spend his tiny amount of money, and you have no choices at all. The interaction is quick. He's probably been anticipating this for so long that the actual event doesn't last. He finishes, pays his coins with a kind of reverent care that suggests how precious they are to him, and leaves without meeting your eyes. You wonder if he feels shame or guilt, or if he's simply lost in his own temporary satisfaction, or if he's already regretting the expenditure. You'll never know, and it doesn't really matter. The enforcer, Quintus, has retired to sleep in short shifts, leaving you more vulnerable during these hours. He's positioned himself in a small room near the entrance where he can hear if there's major trouble, but he's not actively patrolling the corridors anymore. Felix trusts that most clients won't cause serious problems late at night because they want to be able to come back, and causing too much trouble would result in being banned. It's a calculated risk with your safety as the stake. If something goes wrong, if a client becomes too violent or refuses to leave or tries to steal from the establishment, you're mostly on your own until you can scream loud enough to wake Quintus, and even then, he might decide the situation doesn't warrant his intervention depending on various factors you can't predict or control. Between clients, you steal moments of rest that aren't really rest. You can't lie down properly because the next client might arrive at any moment, and you need to be ready to immediately perform the role expected of you. You perch on the edge of your stone bench, head in hands, trying to gather strength that isn't there, drawing on reserves that were depleted hours ago. Your body is trembling, from cold, from exhaustion, from the sustained trauma of the past 18+ hours. The trembling is involuntary, your nervous system expressing distress that you can't afford to consciously acknowledge. Your muscles are in various states of spasm and fatigue. You can feel your heartbeat, too fast and irregular, your body struggling to maintain basic functions under conditions of extreme stress. The other workers are in similar states. The sounds from their cells have changed character. There's less of the performative enthusiasm that clients expect, less of the fake moans and gasps. In these darkest hours, everyone is too tired to maintain the pretense convincingly. The clients who come now either don't notice the difference, too drunk or too focused on themselves to care, or they accept the mechanical nature of the transaction because that's all they expected anyway. You think about sleep the way a starving person thinks about food, as an impossible luxury that other people get to enjoy, something you remember vaguely from a distant past, but can't quite imagine experiencing again. When will this day end? When will you finally be allowed to collapse on your mattress and escape into unconsciousness, even if only for a few hours? But you know from experience that even when you finally do get to sleep, it won't be restful. Your sleep is plagued with nightmares, your unconscious mind processing the trauma of your waking hours. You dream about the day you just lived, a recursive nightmare where the clients never stop coming and your cell never empties. You dream about escaping and being caught, about freedom that dissolves like smoke when you reach for it. You wake repeatedly during your brief rest periods, heart pounding, thinking you hear footsteps in the corridor, or the sound of the brothel opening early. Your body has learned to be constantly vigilant, never fully relaxing even in sleep, always ready for the next threat. It's exhausting in a way that makes the physical labor almost seem trivial by comparison. The medical issues you're dealing with are accumulating in dangerous ways. Romans had some understanding of basic hygiene and certain medical procedures, but nothing approaching modern medical knowledge. They could set bones, perform some surgeries, and treat obvious wounds, but their understanding of infection, disease transmission, and long-term health consequences was limited and often wrong. The constant physical trauma you're experiencing can lead to serious internal injuries that go completely untreated because they're not externally visible. Prolapse, fistulas, internal scarring, chronic pain conditions, these develop over time and worsen with continued trauma. Infections are common and often fatal when they reach vital organs. The crude methods of pregnancy prevention and termination cause their own host of problems, some of which won't manifest for years if you even live that long. If you're enslaved, which is statistically likely, you're not even entitled to the minimal medical care that free workers might access. Felix will call in a doctor only if you're valuable enough to warrant the expense, and the condition is obviously serious enough to impact your ability to work significantly. Anything less than that, you're expected to handle on your own, or simply push through. And Roman doctors, even the good ones, are working with limited knowledge and tools. They might prescribe treatments based on the theory of humours, the belief that the body contains 4 fluids, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, that need to be in balance. Your symptoms might be attributed to an excess of one humour, leading to treatments like bloodletting or purging that weaken you further without addressing the actual problem. Or they might use herbal remedies, some of which have genuine medicinal properties, but most of which are ineffective or harmful. Or they might recommend prayers and sacrifices to the gods, treating your illness as a spiritual problem rather than a physical one. Even when they do something helpful, it's often more by accident than by understanding of the actual mechanisms of disease and healing. There's a psychological phenomenon that happens in sustained captivity and trauma. Your sense of time distorts dramatically. The past becomes foggy and distant, memories fading or becoming unreliable. You can barely remember who you were before this life, if you ever were anything else. Did you have a childhood? A family? Dreams and hopes? These things seem like they might have happened to someone else, or might be stories you heard rather than experiences you lived. The future is unimaginable. You literally cannot envision a time when you won't be doing this, when your life will be different, when you'll have any choices or control. The future is a void, an emptiness that offers nothing to hope for. Planning for tomorrow is meaningless when tomorrow will be identical to today, which was identical to yesterday, which will be identical to all the tomorrows stretching ahead until your body gives out completely. There's only the eternal present of this cell, these clients, this endless cycle of use and degradation. Time has collapsed into a single moment that repeats infinitely, like some philosophical torture designed by a cruel god to test the limits of human endurance. A group arrives, 3 soldiers celebrating something, maybe a promotion or successful completion of a duty. Rotation. They're rowdy, drunk, and they have enough money to reserve 2 workers simultaneously for their entertainment. You and another woman named Julia are selected. She's been here about as long as you have, a fellow survivor who understands the unspoken rules and strategies for getting through encounters with minimal additional harm. What follows is the kind of scenario that pushes the boundaries of what can be described without becoming gratuitously graphic, but suffice it to say that groups present special dangers. They encourage each other to increasingly extreme behavior, competing with each other to appear more masculine or experienced. They have an audience for any cruelty or violation they might commit, which incentivizes performance of dominance. Soldiers in particular can be dangerous clients. They're trained for violence, comfortable with aggression, and often traumatize themselves by their experiences in combat or occupation duty. Some of them take out their own trauma on you, recreating power dynamics where they're the ones in control rather than following orders. Some are aroused by fear or pain, having developed psychological associations between violence and excitement through their military service. You and Julia endure it together, which is both better and worse than enduring things alone. better because there's someone else present who understands, who validates your experience simply by sharing it, who can help deflect some of the attention. Worse because you have to witness what's being done to her just as she witnesses what's being done to you, adding her suffering to your psychological burden. The enforcer, Quintus, wakes up long enough to collect the money and ensure the soldiers don't destroy property. He glances into the cell, assesses that nothing is being broken and no permanent damage is being done to Felix's investments, and returns to his post. Your well-being is not property he's particularly concerned with protecting beyond its market value. Bruises heal, at least the visible ones. You'll both be functional enough to work tomorrow, which is all that matters from his perspective. When the soldiers finally leave, you and Julia don't speak to each other. There are no words adequate to the experience you just shared. You can't comfort each other because you're both too damaged yourselves, too depleted to offer anything to anyone else. You make brief eye contact, mutual acknowledgement of survival, and then return to your separate cells to wait for the next clients. The very latest clients, arriving in the hours before dawn, are often the strangest. Men with specific compulsions that drive them out at inappropriate hours. Men hiding their visits from households or other obligations, sneaking out in the middle of the night to satisfy urges they can't suppress. Men whose reasons for being in a brothel at 3 a.m. are probably concerning even by the already low standards of this profession. You handle them all the same way, with the mechanical efficiency of someone who has long since run out of the emotional resources needed to differentiate between one form of degradation and another. They all blend together into an endless stream of taking, while you have nothing left to give except the continued functioning of your exhausted body. The graffiti on your walls is invisible in the darkness now, but you know it's there. Layers upon layers of names and boasts and crude drawings, accumulating like sediment, creating a fossil record of exploitation. The wall is a testament to your objectification, a record of every person who saw you as something to be used and marked and bragged about. Archaeologists studying Pompeii found similar graffiti preserved by volcanic ash, providing evidence that's both historically valuable and deeply disturbing. These aren't just ancient text, they're documentation of real human suffering, messages left by people who participated in a system of exploitation, preserved for posterity alongside the system's victims, who left no written record of their own experiences. In one of the brief spaces between clients, you hear someone in another cell being beaten. The sounds are unmistakable, the impact of fist or hand on flesh, a cry of pain, furniture scraping as someone tries to get away. This is the reality that your profession's sanitized modern discussions often ignore. Violence was an ever-present threat, and for some clients it was the primary attraction. The enforcer might intervene if it sounds like serious damage is being done to valuable property, but bruises are minor. Injuries are just part of the business. Those are acceptable losses, expected wear and tear on the merchandise. Only if it sounds like a client is doing damage that would put you out of commission for days or weeks will Quintus actually bother to intervene. Your mind drifts to thoughts of escape, as it sometimes does in these darkest hours when exhaustion strips away the mental defenses that usually keep such futile fantasies suppressed. But escape to what? Where would you go? Even if you could somehow break free of this building, slip past Quintus and make it into the streets, you'd be a runaway slave or an illegal prostitute or both. If you're enslaved, you're legally property. Running away is theft of yourself, punishable by severe beatings, branding, or death. The vigiles patrol the streets looking for runaways, and there's a reward system that encourages ordinary citizens to report or capture escaped slaves. Your owner would post notices describing you and offering a reward for your return. With no money, no papers, and no contacts, you'd likely be recaptured within days, if not hours. If you're nominally free but working to pay off debt, or simply because you have no other options, running doesn't solve the fundamental problem that you have no money, no skills that the legitimate economy values, and a permanent stigma that bars you from respectable employment. The jobs available to former prostitutes are extremely limited, essentially other forms of low status, exploitative work that might be no better than what you're doing now. The only real escape is death, and you've thought about that more than once. It would be easy to arrange. There are countless ways to die in ancient Rome, and for someone in your position with nothing to lose, achieving death would be simpler than achieving freedom. But even in your darkest moments, some spark of survival instinct keeps you going. Maybe it's the faint hope that tomorrow will somehow be different, even though you know it won't be. Maybe it's just biological imperative, the body's stubborn insistence on continuing to live even when life has become unbearable. The first hints of dawn begin to appear, a gradual lightening of the darkness visible through the main entrance. If you could see it from your cell, you've made it through another night. The owner will close the brothel soon for a few hours of mandatory rest, not because he cares about your well-being, but because experience has taught him that workers who never sleep eventually break down completely and stop being profitable. There's a point of diminishing returns where exhaustion impacts performance enough that clients complain or don't return, where workers become too obviously damaged to maintain even the thin illusion that makes the transaction palatable to clients who want to pretend this is somehow mutual or acceptable. But there are still clients to see before closing. The early morning crowd is starting to form, men who want to visit the brothel before heading to their own day's work, making this the end of your shift and the beginning of theirs. The cycle continues, as relentless as the rising sun that you can't see from your windowless cell, but whose presence you can feel in the changing quality of light and sound. You see them all, these final clients of a day that has lasted an eternity. Your body moves through the familiar motions without your conscious direction. You've become an automaton, flesh and bone, performing a function without the presence of mind or spirit. You're not really here anymore. You've retreated so far into dissociation that only the most minimal consciousness remains to pilot your body through its required actions. Finally, mercifully, Felix calls an end to business hours. The remaining clients waiting in line are turned away with promises that you'll be available again in a few hours. Some complain, arguing that they've been waiting, but Quintus is already securing the door, unmoved by their protests. Business hours are over. The clients can come back later or go to one of the countless other brothels in the neighborhood. You stumble back to your cell, barely able to walk straight. Your legs feel like they might collapse beneath you at any moment. Every part of your body screams in protest at continued movement, begging for rest. You don't even pull the curtain close behind you. You simply fall onto your mattress, curling into yourself. This is when you're allowed to sleep, in the brief window before the cycle begins again. But even now, even after everything, true rest eludes you. Chapter 5. The Precious Hours of Rest. When sleep becomes the only mercy, the curtain falls across your cell entrance with a finality that brings no real comfort. You're too exhausted to feel relief, too damaged to feel anything clearly anymore. The brothel is closed, at least for the next few hours. Outside your tiny stone prison, Rome is waking up. Properly. You can hear the city coming to life, merchants opening their stalls with the familiar scrape of shutters and wooden barriers being removed, animals being driven through the streets on their way to market or slaughter, their bleating and lowing mixing with human voices, the general noise of a metropolis starting its daily business. But for you and the other workers, this is when the day finally, mercifully ends. The concept of day and night has become meaningless in your windowless cell, marked only by the patterns of clients rather than the position of the sun. You've been working for approximately 20 hours straight, seeing somewhere between 50 and 70 clients. You lost count long ago, and the specific number is irrelevant anyway. Each one took something from you, and collectively they've left you completely hollowed out. You collapse onto your thin mattress without even attempting to clean yourself properly. The basin of water in your cell is filthy now, grey and scummy with accumulated use. You should change it, but you lack the energy to walk to the communal water supply and carry a heavy basin back. The exhaustion is so complete, so total, that your body simply shuts down. You're past tired, past exhausted, past any normal descriptor for fatigue. Every muscle aches. Every bone feels like it might shatter if you move wrong. The physical trauma of the past 20 hours has left you feeling like you've been beaten from the inside out. Every muscle aches in different ways, some from overuse, others from being forced into positions they're not designed to sustain, still others from direct trauma where clients gripped or struck or handled you roughly. The physical trauma accumulates in ways that you can feel spreading through your body like a slow poison. Your joints are inflamed. Your skin is tender in too many places to count. Internal pain radiates from your core, sharp and persistent. Sleep doesn't come immediately, despite the exhaustion. This is a cruelty that compounds all the others, being so tired that you can barely think, yet unable to slip into unconsciousness because your mind is still racing, still processing the endless succession of clients and violations. This is a kind of trauma response that won't be properly understood or named for nearly 2,000 years, but you're experiencing it nonetheless. The Romans had no concept of psychological trauma as we understand it. They recognized that terrible experiences could change people. Soldiers who had seen too much combat might become jumpy or withdrawn. Enslaved people who had been severely mistreated might become either cowed or violent. But they had no framework for understanding trauma as an injury to the mind and spirit that required treatment and healing. No recognition that the psyche could be damaged as surely as the body. When sleep finally claims you, it's not restful. You dream, and your dreams are filled with the day you just lived. High, recursive nightmare where the clients never stop coming and your cell never empties. In your dreams, you're trying to refuse a client but no words come out. Or you're trying to run but your legs won't move. Or you're screaming but no one hears you. These are the dreams of powerlessness. Your unconscious mind processing the complete lack of agency that defines your waking life. You wake several times in those precious few hours of rest, heart pounding, sometimes not even sure whether you're awake or still dreaming. The distinction has become blurred. Your body remains tensed even in sleep, ready for the next client even though the brothel is closed. Your nervous system can't relax, can't accept that you're temporarily safe from further violation. It's learned that safety is an illusion, that the next threat is always just moments away, and no amount of exhaustion can override that learned response. The other workers are experiencing similar fitful rest. The thin walls carry sound in both directions, and you can hear someone crying softly several cells away, the sound muffled by hands or fabric pressed against her face to quiet the sobs. Someone else is having a nightmare, making small sounds of distress in her sleep, whimpers and gasps that suggest she's reliving something terrible. The youngest workers, the newest additions to this life, are suffering the most visibly. They haven't yet developed the mental calluses that allow for any kind of psychological survival. They haven't learned to dissociate effectively, to separate mind from body, to create the internal distance necessary to endure. They're experiencing everything with full consciousness and full presence, and it's destroying them in real time. You want to help them, to share the coping strategies you've developed, but you're not sure that would be a kindness? Is it better to learn to survive in this situation, or to remain unable to tolerate it, and perhaps find a quicker end to the suffering? You don't know, and you're too tired and damaged yourself to work through the moral implications. You can barely manage your own survival, much less guide others through theirs. Your body is trying to heal itself during these brief hours, but there's not enough time. The minor injuries you've accumulated need days or weeks to heal properly, not hours. The exhaustion requires deep, prolonged rest to overcome, the kind of sleep where you can stay unconscious for 12 or 16 hours straight, allowing your body to truly recover. The psychological damage requires safety, support, processing time, and therapeutic intervention, none of which you have access to in any form. Instead, you get maybe 4 to 6 hours of broken sleep before the cycle begins again. Your body does what it can in that limited time, prioritizing the most critical repairs while leaving everything else in a state of progressive degradation. It's a losing battle. Each day you're slightly more damaged than the day before. The cumulative wear and tear is slowly breaking you down, and there's no prospect of the kind of extended rest and recovery that would allow you to heal. The physical space of your cell offers no comfort. The stone walls are cold and damp, their surface rough and uneven. Moisture seeps through them, creating patches of mold and mildew that contribute to the musty smell. The ceiling is low enough that you can't stand fully upright in some spots without your head brushing against the stone. The air is stale and carries the smell of countless bodies and activities, a thick, unpleasant atmosphere that you've become nose-blind to most of the time, but that occasionally breaks through into your awareness. This is your entire world. 7 feet by 7 feet of stone and crude graffiti, a stone bench with a thin mattress, and a curtain that offers the barest illusion of privacy. The walls are covered in layers of messages left by clients, creating a palimpsest of exploitation. Some of the older graffiti has been partially worn away or covered by newer writing, but the cumulative effect is overwhelming. You're surrounded by evidence of your objectification, unable to escape the testimony of hundreds or thousands of men who saw you as merchandise. You don't have personal possessions to speak of. Everything you own could fit in a small bag, and even that assumes you legally have the right to own anything, which you don't if you're enslaved. Maybe one change of clothing if you're lucky, another thin tunic identical to the one you're wearing, a comb made of cheap bone or wood with several teeth missing, possibly a small scratch bronze mirror or some basic makeup supplies, all of the cheapest quality available. Enslaved workers legally can't own property at all. Everything belongs to their master, including the clothes on their backs and even the food in their stomachs. Even free workers in your position are too poor to accumulate anything of value. Any money that somehow came into your possession would be taken by your owner or stolen by someone stronger than you. There's no security, no way to save or build toward anything better. There are no letters from family to read during these rest hours, no keepsakes to remind you of better times, no books or entertainment. Most prostitutes in ancient Rome were illiterate anyway. Education was a privilege of the wealthy, and even basic literacy required years of instruction that cost money your family never had. Even if you could read, you certainly couldn't afford books or scrolls. A single book might cost as much as an unskilled worker earned in months. Your entertainment, such as it is, consists of conversations with other workers when the opportunity arises, though after a while you run out of things to say to each other. What is there to talk about? Your shared experiences are too painful to discuss directly. Your individual pasts are too depressing to revisit. The future is too bleak to contemplate. So you talk about nothing. Idle comments about Felix or Quintus, observations about particularly strange clients, The kind of superficial conversation that fills time without engaging with anything real. The food situation during rest hours is slightly better than during working hours, but only slightly. There might be a communal meal provided before the brothel opens again, porridge or stew made from the cheapest ingredients available, designed to keep you functional rather than to provide any pleasure or variety. The porridge might be made from barley or millet, grains cheaper than wheat, cooked in water without milk or honey or any of the additions that would make it palatable. The stew, when it appears, is a collection of whatever vegetables are cheapest at market: onions, turnips, cheap greens that are starting to wilt, and occasionally small pieces of the lowest quality meat or fish. Sometimes the meat is so old it's starting to turn, but it gets cooked thoroughly enough to kill the smell and hopefully the harmful effects. You've learned not to ask too many questions about what you're eating. Food is fuel. Fuel keeps you alive. That's all it needs to be. You eat mechanically, fueling your body for the next shift without tasting or enjoying the food. Your sense of taste has dulled anyway, either from malnutrition or from the general numbing of your senses that comes with sustained trauma. Food is divided into two categories: edible and inedible. Within the edible category, there are no further distinctions worth making. If you're dealing with injuries beyond the normal wear and tear, this is when you try to address them, but your options are severely limited. There's no trained medical professional on call for workers at a cheap brothel. You might have access to some basic remedies that are shared among the workers. Wine to clean wounds, which stings terribly, but does have some antiseptic properties from the alcohol content. Honey, which has antibacterial properties the Romans knew about empirically, even if they didn't understand the mechanisms. Some herbs with mild analgesic effects, willow bark that contains a compound similar to aspirin, though much weaker and less reliable, for more serious problems, infections, injuries from violent clients, complications from pregnancies, or their termination. You're essentially on your own, unless the problem becomes severe enough that your owner fears losing his investment. And even then, Roman medicine is a combination of legitimate knowledge, superstition, and practices that can do more harm than good. The Romans knew some things about anatomy from their gladiatorial games, where doctors could observe injuries and their effects, and from military experience treating wounded soldiers. They had surgical tools and could perform certain operations, removing arrows, amputating limbs, cutting for bladder stones. But they had no concept of germ theory, no antibiotics, no understanding of how infections spread, or how to prevent them beyond basic cleanliness. Their understanding of disease was based on theories that were fundamentally wrong. The theory of the four humours, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, led to treatments that often weakened patients further. If you were diagnosed with an excess of blood, they might perform bleeding, using lancets or leeches to remove blood and supposedly restore balance. If you had too much phlegm, they might prescribe emetics to induce vomiting. These treatments could kill you as easily as cure you. A simple infection could easily become fatal, and did so regularly for people in your profession who were at high risk for all manner of infections. A small cut that becomes infected can spread to the blood, causing sepsis that kills you within days. Sexually transmitted infections can spread internally, causing pelvic inflammatory disease, abscesses, or systemic illness. There are no antibiotics, no effective treatments, just folk remedies and prayers. Mental health is a concept that doesn't exist in any meaningful way in ancient Rome. The idea that psychological experiences could cause lasting harm, that trauma could break a person from the inside, that healing required more than just physical recovery. None of this is understood or acknowledged in your society. People recognize that some individuals become mad or melancholy, but these are seen as character flaws or divine punishments, rather than as conditions requiring treatment. If you're visibly struggling emotionally, you're more likely to be seen as weak or defective rather than as someone who needs help. There's no therapy, no support groups, no recognition that what you're experiencing day after day would break almost anyone. You're expected to simply endure, to be tough, to accept your lot in life without complaint, because that's what slaves and prostitutes are supposed to do. If you can't endure, if you break down or become non-functional, you're simply replaced. Felix has access to a continuous supply of new workers through the slave markets and through poverty that drives free women into the profession. Individual workers are replaceable components in his business model. Your suffering matters only insofar as it affects your productivity. Some workers turn to wine or other substances to numb themselves, to create chemical distance from the psychological pain when the mental distance of dissociation isn't enough. Alcohol is readily available and relatively cheap in ancient Rome. Even the poorest citizens can usually afford basic wine. Getting drunk might provide temporary relief, a few hours where the pain is muffled and the memories are blurred. But drinking creates its own problems. Felix frowns on workers being too intoxicated to perform. Drunk workers are unpredictable, sloppy, less able to perform the necessary acts, and more likely to provoke client complaints. Too much drinking can get you punished or replaced. But he also understands that some degree of self-medication is inevitable, given the circumstances. He allows it as long as it doesn't significantly impact productivity. There are also other substances available in Rome's underground economy. Opium. From the East, various herbal preparations with psychoactive properties, concoctions that promise relief or forgetfulness. But these cost money you don't have, and their effects are unpredictable. You've heard stories of workers who became dependent on substances and lost even the small amount of control they once had, becoming completely non-functional and being discarded to die in the streets. Religion might offer some comfort, though the Roman gods were not known for their mercy toward the downtrodden. You might pray to Venus, goddess of love and sexuality, asking for her protection, even though she's also the goddess associated with your profession, and therefore her protection seems unlikely. You might make small offerings to the household gods if the brothel has a shrine, a bit of food, a splash of wine, a whispered prayer. But deep down, you know that if the gods cared about people in your position, they would have intervened already. The gods receive sacrifices and prayers from the wealthy, the powerful, the successful, people who can afford elaborate rituals and valuable offerings. Your small prayers and tiny offerings, given from a position of complete powerlessness, are unlikely to move them. The Romans had various religious and philosophical traditions, but most of them offered little comfort to enslaved or impoverished people, especially those in professions considered degrading. The Stoics preached acceptance of one's fate, finding virtue in how you respond to circumstances rather than trying to change the circumstances themselves. This philosophy might help someone maintain dignity in difficult circumstances, but it also conveniently justifies the social order by suggesting that enslaved people should simply accept their slavery virtuously. The Epicureans taught the pursuit of modest pleasures and avoidance of pain, but their definition of modest pleasures assumed a level of basic security and autonomy that you don't possess. It's easy to counsel moderation and simple pleasures when your basic needs are met, and you have choices about how to live. It's meaningless when you have no choices, and your basic needs are barely met. Christianity exists in this time period. Remember, we're in the mid-2nd century CE, about a century after Jesus' death. Christianity is still a small, often persecuted sect, viewed with suspicion by Roman authorities as a potentially subversive foreign cult. But it's growing, spreading through the empire's underclass and marginalized populations. Some Christians did reach out to prostitutes and other marginalized people, offering a religious framework that valued all souls, equally regardless of social status. The idea that an enslaved prostitute had the same spiritual worth as a wealthy senator was revolutionary and appealing. Some Christian communities helped people leave prostitution or provided support to those still trapped in it. But you probably have minimal contact with Christian communities. They meet secretly to avoid persecution, and they're cautious about who they allow into their circles. Even if you encountered them and wanted to join, actually extricating yourself from your current situation would be nearly impossible. They can offer spiritual comfort and perhaps some material assistance, but they can't buy your freedom or change the legal and social structures that trap you. As you lie on your mattress in these precious hours of rest, you might think about the past, if you can remember it clearly through the fog of trauma and exhaustion. Maybe you were born free and fell into this life through desperation. Your family was so poor that selling you seemed like the only way to keep the rest of them from starving. Maybe you remember parents, siblings, a childhood that didn't involve this kind of suffering. Those memories are painful to revisit because they highlight how far you've fallen, how much you've lost. Or maybe you were born into prostitution, the child of another worker in this profession, or one like it. Maybe this is all you've ever known, growing up in brothels or their equivalents, understanding from your earliest memories that your body was a commodity to be sold. That might actually be easier in some ways. You don't have the pain of remembering a better life that was taken from you. Your suffering is just the normal state of existence, rather than a betrayal of something better that you once had. The future is even harder to contemplate than the past. What is there to hope for? If you're enslaved, freedom requires your owner to manumit you voluntarily, which he has no incentive to do while you're still profitable and young enough to attract clients. Manumission usually happens when slaves are too old or damaged to be useful anymore, at which point freedom just means the right to starve on your own, rather than having an owner responsible for feeding you. Even if you were freed tomorrow, the social stigma would follow you forever. Former prostitutes were legally barred from marrying citizens and held the status of infamous for life. This wasn't something that could be hidden or overcome. Your past would be known, documented in various official records, and would mark you permanently as less than a full citizen. If you're free but working to pay off debt, you're trapped in a cycle where your earnings, none of which go to you, are supposedly reducing what you owe, but somehow the debt never seems to decrease. This is a common form of exploitation in ancient Rome and throughout history. Your owner keeps the books, and you have no way to verify them or dispute them. The numbers can be manipulated to ensure that you never work off your debt, no matter how many years you labor. Age is your enemy in this profession. You're already experiencing the physical breakdown that comes from this kind of work. By your late 20s, if you even survive that long, you'll be considered too old, too worn down to command even the minimal prices you currently fetch. The demand is for young workers, fresh faces and bodies that haven't yet shown the cumulative damage of the profession. What happens when you age out? There's no retirement plan, no social safety net, no pension system for former prostitutes. You might be discarded to end up begging on the streets, competing with countless other desperate people for scraps and charity. If you're enslaved, you might be sold to a master who needs someone for menial labor and doesn't care that you're broken. Heavy cleaning work, agricultural labor, work in fulling operations or other industries that destroy the body but don't require youth or beauty. Or you might simply die, either from disease or violence or accumulated damage, and be disposed of in a mass grave with other enslaved people and urban poor. No marker, no memorial, no record that you ever existed, except perhaps as a name, scratched on a cell wall or a line in an owner's account books. Some workers form close bonds with each other, finding in their shared suffering a kind of sisterhood or mutual support. You might have one or two among the other workers that you consider something like friends, people you trust slightly more than the others, who you might confide in or receive comfort from in very small ways. But these relationships are complicated. There's competition for slightly better treatment from your owner, being selected for less dangerous clients, getting slightly more food, being allowed small privileges. There's the reality that any of you could be sold or moved at your owner's whim, severing relationships without warning. And there's the simple fact that you're all so damaged and exhausted that maintaining emotional connections requires energy you don't have. Opening yourself emotionally to someone else means making yourself vulnerable to additional pain when they're hurt or when you're separated. Many workers find it safer to remain emotionally isolated, not investing in relationships that can be arbitrarily destroyed, protecting themselves from additional sources of suffering by maintaining careful distance even from their fellow captives. The rest period is drawing to a close. You can feel it approaching with a sense of dread that has become familiar. The brief respite is ending, and the cycle is about to begin again. Your body hasn't fully recovered. Recovery would require days or weeks, not hours. Your mind hasn't healed. Healing would require safety and support that don't exist in your world. But recovery isn't the point. Survival is the point, and barely so. You hear stirring in the corridor. The overseer Quintus is waking up, which means workers will be roused soon. You can hear the sounds of the city growing louder. Rome is fully awake now, the morning rush of activity in full swing. The brothel will open for another day. More clients will come. More. Hours will pass in an endless succession of exploitation and endurance. You close your eyes for one more moment, stealing a few final seconds of something approximating peace before the nightmare begins again. This is your life. This is what you wouldn't survive, not because the physical acts would kill you immediately, but because the sustained trauma, the complete lack of agency, the reduction of your humanity to a commodity sold for the price of bread, all of this would break you in ways that might never heal even if you somehow escaped. The damage being done to you is cumulative and permanent. Your body is being worn down in ways that will leave lasting effects if you live long enough to experience them. Your psyche is being shattered in ways that would require years of intensive therapy to even begin to address. Therapy that won't be invented for 2,000 years. You're surviving, technically, in the sense that you continue to breathe and move and perform required functions, but the person you might have been is dying a little more each day. The overseer's voice echoes through the building, familiar and hateful. Time to wake up. Time to prepare for another day. Time to open for business. You hear the other workers beginning to stir, reluctant movements as everyone delays the moment of full wakefulness as long as possible. Your day is about to begin again. The same day as yesterday. The same day as tomorrow will be. An endless cycle of suffering that continues until your body gives out, or until something breaks catastrophically enough that even your trained dissociation can't protect you anymore. You open your eyes to the dim lamplight of your cell. The graffiti-covered walls surround you like a prison of testimony, each mark a reminder of your objectification. Your body aches in the familiar ways, the pain that has become your constant companion. It's time to work. Conclusion: the unbearable weight of historical reality and why we must remember. So there it is. A day in the life of a prostitute in ancient Rome, the parts that history books gloss over or entirely omit when they're describing the glory of the eternal city. Not the glamorized courtesan reclining on silk cushions and engaging in witty repartee with senators, discussing philosophy between encounters with wealthy patrons. Not the mythologized temple prostitute performing sacred rituals in service to Venus or some other deity. Just the brutal, grinding reality of selling access to your body for the price of bread, day after day after day, with no escape and no hope for anything better. You wouldn't last a day in this life, and that's not an insult to your resilience or toughness. It's not about being weak or strong. It's a recognition of just how extreme and inhuman the circumstances were. The sustained physical trauma alone would break most people within hours. Your body would be screaming in protest long before you reached the 20th or 30th client of the day, let alone the 50th or 60th. Add the psychological toll of complete objectification, being treated not as a person with thoughts and feelings, but as a thing to be used and discarded. Add the constant threat of violence from clients, from your owner, from the enforcers, from the very structure of Roman law that provided you with no protection. Add the absence of any agency or control over your own existence, the inability to make even the smallest decisions about your day or your life. Add the crushing weight of knowing this is your reality for as long as your body holds out, with no prospect of change or improvement. It's beyond what human beings are designed to endure. Yes, people did endure it, millions of them throughout Roman history. They survived day after horrific day, developing psychological coping mechanisms that allowed them to maintain some small spark of humanity, even as they were systematically dehumanized. Their resilience is both inspiring and heartbreaking. They deserved so much better than what they got. The average person in the modern developed world has protections and privileges that would seem like impossible luxuries, like fever dreams of paradise, to someone in your position 2,000 years ago. The right to refuse unwanted sexual contact, enshrined in law, and imperfectly but increasingly enforced. Legal recognition as a full person with rights that cannot be arbitrarily removed. Access to medical care that might actually heal you rather than kill you with the attempted cure. The ability to choose your profession from a range of options, rather than having your role determined entirely by birth and circumstance. Protection from exploitation through labour laws, minimum wages, workplace safety regulations, all the boring administrative apparatus that prevents the kind of complete exploitation you experienced. The ability to leave a situation that's harming you, to seek help from authorities or social services, to have your suffering recognised and addressed rather than ignored or justified. These aren't universal throughout the world, even now, sadly. Human trafficking, coerced prostitution, and economic circumstances that force people into selling their bodies continue in the 21st century. The specifics differ from ancient Rome. The technology is different, the legal structures are different, the specific mechanisms of exploitation have evolved, but the fundamental dynamic remains depressingly familiar. Vulnerable people being exploited by those with more power, with society at large either ignoring the problem or actively profiting from it. But where these protections and rights do exist, they represent a fundamental shift from the Roman system that saw certain categories of people as acceptable to use and discard. They represent centuries of struggle by people fighting for the recognition of universal human dignity. They're achievements worth protecting and extending, not perfect certainly, but infinitely better than what came before. When you think about ancient Rome, the typical image is probably the Colosseum where gladiators fought to entertain crowds, the Forum where senators debated matters of state, marble statues of gods and emperors standing in temples and public spaces, noble senators in white togas discussing philosophy and governance. That's the Rome of monuments and glory, the Rome that built aqueducts that still stand 2,000 years later, the Rome that conquered territories from Britannia to Syria and maintained the largest empire the Western world had yet seen. But there was another Rome existing simultaneously, often just streets away from all that marble and philosophy, a Rome of desperate poverty and systematic exploitation, where human beings were bought and sold like livestock in markets that operated daily, where entire industries existed to profit from the suffering of the most vulnerable, where the very laws that protected some people explicitly denied protection to others based on their social status. The prostitutes of ancient Rome, the vast majority of them, not the exceptional few who achieved wealth or fame through extraordinary circumstances, lived and died in obscurity. Most didn't leave their names in the historical record. They weren't important enough to mention in the histories and biographies that chronicled the deeds of emperors and generals. They existed in the background of Roman life, providing services that society deemed necessary while being despised for providing them. The graffiti on brothel walls in Pompeii preserves some of their names: Primigenia, Fortunata, Daphne. But we know nothing else about them. Were these their real names or professional names chosen for them? Were they enslaved or free? How old were they? Where did they come from? How long did they survive in the profession? We'll never know. The graffiti preserves the names of some clients boasting about their conquests, but the conquered themselves remain voiceless. The tax records list brothels and their revenue, but not the individual workers generating that revenue. The legal codes define the status of prostitutes and the regulations governing the trade, but don't acknowledge the humanity of the people trapped in it. The philosophical debates discuss whether using prostitutes is morally acceptable, but rarely, if ever, consider the question from the perspective of the prostitutes themselves. We can reconstruct what daily life was likely like through archaeology, historical sources, comparative analysis with other pre-modern societies, and inference from what we know about Roman social structures and economic systems. But we'll never fully know the individual stories, the specific dreams that were crushed, the particular moments of joy that might have pierced the darkness, or the ways that people maintain their humanity in circumstances designed to strip it away. What we do know is that the system was designed to extract maximum value from human bodies with minimum investment in human welfare, and it operated at scale throughout the Roman Empire for centuries. We know that the economics were deliberately structured to trap people in the profession with no realistic path to escape. We know that Roman law provided protection to some classes of people while explicitly denying it to others, creating a legal framework that facilitated exploitation. We know that violence was common, disease was rampant, life expectancy was short, and suffering was the norm rather than the exception. We know all of this from the surviving evidence, and from it we can extrapolate the daily reality that the evidence points toward. This isn't ancient history in the sense of being irrelevant to our current world. Systems of sexual exploitation still exist, operating in shadows but using similar dynamics. Economic desperation forcing people into situations they wouldn't choose if they had better options, power imbalances allowing some people to exploit others, social structures that marginalize and stigmatize victims while protecting or even celebrating perpetrators. Understanding historical reality serves multiple purposes beyond just satisfying curiosity about the past. It helps us appreciate the privileges and protections many of us have that our ancestors didn't, fostering gratitude for progress rather than taking it for granted. It illuminates the darker aspects of civilizations we often romanticize, providing a more complete and honest picture of what life was actually like, rather than the sanitized version presented in popular culture. It reminds us that progress in human rights and dignity isn't inevitable or automatic. It doesn't just happen on its own through the march of time. It requires continuous, active effort to maintain and extend. Rights that exist can be taken away. Protections that seem solid can erode. Vigilance is required to prevent backsliding into the kind of systematic exploitation that characterized earlier eras. And perhaps most importantly, it honours in some small way the millions of people who suffered through these circumstances, whose lives were hard in ways we struggle to fully comprehend even after spending 15,000 words describing a single day. They deserve to be remembered not as statistics or abstractions, but as human beings who endured the unendurable because they had no other choice. So the next time you hear someone waxing nostalgic about ancient Rome, about how great it would be to live in that era of glory and civilization, about how much better things were in the good old days, remember this day we just walked through together. Remember the stone cells measuring 7 feet by 7 feet. Remember the endless succession of clients, 50 or 60 or 70 in a single day, each one taking something and leaving nothing but trauma. Remember the physical pain, the psychological dissociation, the complete absence of choice or hope. Remember that for every senator philosophizing in the forum about virtue and governance, there were thousands of people like you, trapped in circumstances that would destroy most of us within hours, much less the years or decades that some survived. Remember that the marble temples and impressive architecture and philosophical achievements were built on the backs of enslaved people and funded by tax revenue that included taxes on prostitution. Remember that the glory of Rome, the civilization that gave us so much in terms of law and engineering and administration and culture, was also a civilization that bought and sold human beings as property and created elaborate legal and social structures to justify and perpetuate that exploitation. You wouldn't last a day as a prostitute in ancient Rome because no one should have to. The fact that millions of people did, that they survived day after day in circumstances that seem unendurable, speaks to a kind of resilience that's both inspiring and heartbreaking. But resilience in the face of injustice isn't the same as justice. Surviving exploitation doesn't make the exploitation acceptable. They deserved so much better than what they got. We remember them now, not to celebrate their suffering or romanticize their endurance, but to acknowledge the reality of their experiences and to commit to building a world where such systematic exploitation becomes increasingly difficult to maintain, where more and more people have the rights and protections and choices that they were denied. Thank you for watching this deep dive into one of history's most uncomfortable topics. If you learned something from this examination of daily life in ancient Rome's sex trade, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more historical content that doesn't shy away from difficult realities. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts or suggesting other historical topics you'd like me to cover in future videos. Remember, understanding the past helps us build a better future, but only if we're willing to confront its darkest corners honestly, to look at the suffering alongside the achievements, to recognize that civilizations we admire often had deep flaws and systematic injustices built into their very foundations. The goal isn't to condemn the past from our modern perspective, but to learn from it, to understand how and why such systems developed, and to ensure we don't repeat the same patterns in new forms. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical of romanticized versions of history, and appreciate the rights and protections you have. They didn't exist for most of human history. They don't exist everywhere even now, and they're not guaranteed to continue existing without active effort to preserve and extend them. The story of human progress is the story of people fighting to expand the circle of who counts as fully human and deserving of dignity and rights. That fight isn't over. The women whose day we just explored didn't have voices in the historical record. We've tried to give them one here, reconstructed from evidence and inference and comparative analysis. They lived, they suffered, they survived as long as they could, and then they died and were forgotten by a civilization that used them but didn't value them. We remember them now. We acknowledge their humanity even though their society denied it. We recognize their suffering even though their world justified it. and we commit to doing better, to building societies where fewer and fewer people experience the kind of systematic exploitation that was their daily reality. That's how we honour them, not through pity or romanticisation, but through honest remembrance and active commitment to justice. Thanks for watching.